a lot of this is just still yet to come. And what I'm saying is it's going to get worse before it gets better. Hi, everyone. Matthew Kruse at Comstock Investments. I'm going to start by looking at Brazilian weather. It's been a little spotty this year in Mato Grosso getting started. A lot of people have been complaining, that they're just kind of barely getting by. But it looks like last week they got some pretty good rains in Mato Grosso, and that's going to continue on here into the next week. This is kind of the forecast for rainfall through November 17th. And so you see here, most of the center west region, except for maybe Goiás right here in the center, looks pretty good for the most part, kind of half an inch up to 3 inches in most areas, all the way down to southern part of Brazil, state of Paraná, Rio Grande do Sul. Looks like part of Paraguay is where they're going to see some of the heaviest rainfall, up to 8 inches in some areas, and then kind of surrounding regions from there, spilling over into Argentina, Rio Grande do Sul, in those areas. But we do see some dryness here in Goiás, which is, I think, the fourth largest soybean producing state in Brazil. Looking out ahead a little bit further into the third week of November, we still see at least the northern half of Mato Grosso gets pretty good rainfall, and we see the rain shifting into the east and northeast portions. And so those are areas that are planted a little bit later, but will benefit and kind of accelerate the planting there. But we do see a drying pattern here in the center part of Brazil. Now it's going into this, for the most part, well watered, except for maybe parts there, Goiás. And so I don't know that it's anything alarming yet. It kind of depends on how long it lasts, of course, but it is unusual in this kind of period of late November to see a dry pattern that large, I think. So you're encompassing here the southern part of Mato Grosso do Sul, parts of Goiás I talked about, and then even maybe kind of the northern half of Paraná. So it's a pretty large region, but time will tell. As hard to say exactly when it's going to end, but looking longer term, now this is all the way out closer to Christmas. Basically, we kind of see above average rainfall for the most part in the northern half of Brazil. And so rainfall we expect to see by the end of November to pick back up again. However, we've talked about this in the past, but we continue to see kind of a drying trend here in southern part of Brazil and kind of spilling over into Argentina. And so that's a lot of that's based off of the La Nina climate effects that we've been talking about. And so time will tell. It's not as precise looking out that far, about 45 days out yet from there, but time will tell as we get closer. So for those of you that have been following our channel or Comstock Report subscribers, you've probably caught that my wife and I and my family, we import coffee from our farm in Brazil directly here to the United States. And coffee, at least from Brazil, is tariffed at 50% right now. And so I'm actually paying a tariff. I paid $42,000 to the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency of the U.S. government this week. $42,000 that we're paying in tariffs based on the coffee that we brought in. And so I hear a lot of talk about tariffs and this and that and how they affect things, but I'm actually going through it myself personally, writing out the check to pay those tariffs. And so I think I kind of have a unique perspective on how that works and how it's affecting at least the coffee industry. I can't speak for every industry, but you kind of see the effects here of what that's having on the coffee market right now, where this is basically looking back in the last 50 years, what coffee prices have done on the C market. And you can see that, we went and made a new high, all-time high, and we're continuing to trade and retest those new all-time highs right now. And so it's these tariffs are, people might have different opinions, but in my own experience, we have to pass on this tariff to our customers, and those customers will then pass it on to their customers, because we can't afford to just pay an additional $42,000 out of our pocket and remain in business. And so we have to pass that cost on. And so I know a lot of people may still be confused on this, but essentially I look at those tariffs as just a tax that gets passed on to the American consumer. And I know that right now, or as of last week, the U.S. Supreme Court actually heard arguments from the Trump administration, arguing that these tariffs were a matter of national security, that this $42,000 that I sent was a matter of national security, and they needed that money to help I guess, support the country or whatnot. But so it has been challenged. These ideas of these tariffs have been challenged and at the highest level, and the Supreme Court is weighing that decision now. And so we don't know, that decision could take several weeks, could take several months yet. We don't exactly know what's going to happen. But in theory, they could, say these tariffs are an overreach on the executive branch, and they could not allow them because historically tariffs have to be passed by Congress, and by President Trump utilizing an emergency act, he basically said that he didn't need Congress. He could do this without them. And so that's what the Supreme Court is essentially trying to decide right now. Brazil has been lobbying to reduce those tariffs pretty hard, and I still think that they'll get it done. I don't think they're going to get it down to zero, but oddly right now, Brazil has tariffs higher than China does. I think China's overall effective tariff rate has been reduced now to 47%, whereas Brazil, for the most part, is still at 50%. And so it's unusual because we don't really produce coffee in the United States, at least not on any scale. There's a little bit in Hawaii, but it's pretty insignificant. And so we're basically taxing ourselves for something that we don't produce and can't produce. We can't bring coffee production back to the United States. But essentially, this is where you're at. And as long as I think tariffs are in place, you're going to see coffee continue to linger at these levels. But I have seen people argue that, the tariffs really aren't that inflationary yet, that we've had tariffs with lumber and things like that. We haven't seen, lumber prices take off or anything like that. But first thing I would say is you need to give this stuff a little bit of time to see its full impact. Like we're just now bringing our first tariff coffee in. And so, it's been well documented that coffee prices have already shot up dramatically at grocery stores. And that still doesn't fully reflect the tariff rates that are currently been enacted. And so a lot of this is just still yet to come. And what I'm saying is it's going to get worse before it gets better. This is something I pull off of Bloomberg and kind of going through a similar situation where we consume a lot of aluminum in the United States. We don't produce enough of it. We rely heavily on Canadian aluminum imports. And so since we don't have it and we're tariffing them at 50% rate, inventories have dropped off. And what happens when inventories drop off? Prices skyrocket. And so there's currently seeing all-time highs in aluminum, and you're seeing this in other commodities and other industries. I suppose the idea would be that, maybe we'll bring aluminum production more back to the United States. And that's all great. It takes, billions of dollars and several years or more to do that. But for the time being, it causes tremendous disruption in the industry, and this cost ultimately gets passed on to the consumer, right? The number one selling pickup truck in the United States is the F-150 from Ford Motors, and those trucks are famously made with military grade aluminum as they market it on their commercials. And so, this is going to cause just one example where it causes a tremendous financial impact on, a major company like Ford. Fortunately for me, while I'm a coffee importer, I'm also a soybean producer. And so it's kind of an odd situation where our industry, the soybean industry, is expecting some sort of government subsidy from the Trump administration to, help offset the impact of these tariffs. So on one side, I'm paying $42,000 for coffee tariffs. And then over here, I'm expecting a big check from the government to offset the damage from those tariffs. And so now maybe that government subsidy over here for my soybean production won't completely offset that tariff, but it's going to be pretty close. And so essentially, I feel like I'm just recycling money where I'm sending money over here to pay this tariff. And then the government says, oh, you were damaged by that tariff that you just paid. And so now we're going to pay you over here for that. And so not everyone, of course, raises soybeans and can offset those by soybean production, but it's kind of a unique situation in my own personal experience. So I guess in summary, what I'm saying is that, what I'm seeing, and I can only speak to the ag industry or the coffee industry, is that it is creating these tariffs a tremendous amount of financial turmoil for thousands of small businesses across America, while at the same time essentially enriching foreign coffee growers, I guess, and making them very wealthy off of these high prices, the highest price that they've ever experienced. And so I'm not sure what we gain by that, but that's essentially the situation from someone that's actually going through it and paying these tariffs. So I just wanted to relay that experience with you. And if you have any questions about the tariffs and how they're paid, anything like that, let me know. Thank you and have a good day.
Futures trading involves risk. The risk of loss in trading futures and/or options is substantial, and each investor and/or trader must consider whether this is a suitable investment. Past performance is not indicative of future results.